Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Representative James Arciero of Massachusetts. But most fun was I had a chance to partner up again with Mary McCauley, my podcast mate from Married to Real Estate. And we had the pleasure of talking about accessory dwelling units. Massachusetts is the 19th state of 20 that have passed legislation so far. Other states are considering it as a way of easing housing shortage. So that's one of the goals of accessory dwelling units. So stand by. Great conversation. Has so many tentacles into other issues. And I know you're going to enjoy listening to Representative Arciero and Mary McCauley. Welcome to Real Estate Connections Podcast, where relationships open doors. I'm Mary Foerster, and housing is a universal need. We are often thinking about our existing housing, our future housing, that possibly of family members. This is where you're going to hear the issues and the people who are working the issues every day. Please hit subscribe and like if you find this podcast helpful to you. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone back to Married to Real Estate. Here with Mary Foerster, I'm Mary McCauley, and we have a special guest today, Jim Arciero, who is our rep from Westford, Littleton, and parts of Chelmsford, which I thought was interesting. Not all of Chelmsford.
South Chelmsford?
It's going to be more West Chelmsford.
Okay. Oh, West Chelmsford.
Yeah.
So, Acton Road.
So you're Acton Road?
Right next to the golf course.
Okay, no, that's South Chelmsford. So that would be more going towards Carlisle,
I'm so disappointed.
etc.
Okay.
No, it's okay, but it's confusing.
I can still be friends.
I've been a legislator for 18 years, and they've redistricted a number of different legislators within Chelmsford for like 20 years, which is absurd.
Okay.
But we've done our best to, represent Chelmsford, and we love Chelmsford, actually, because I've represented for so long. But they've moved us around a couple of times on the redistricting, so...
I'll adopt you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Good. Yes, adopted. I like that. So, Jim, we're here to talk about ADUs. Mm-hmm. So you were instrumental in 2025 of getting 24, getting that passed in the state of Massachusetts. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
what is an ADU first?
An accessory dwelling unit. So that would be, just to put it into layman's terms, a granny flat and, an apartment that was built either, attached or detached or above a garage or below, a single family home in order to provide more housing. That's like a real simple, easy answer. We sometimes think about ADUs as a new concept. They really aren't. They've existed for decades.
Big in California.
Certainly,
right?
But in Massachusetts, they've existed too. We think that they're so new. What's new about it is they're by right.
Yes.
So in the past, it was a special permit.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so put that aside for a second, the ADU piece, and we talked a little bit about housing. So during the pandemic, we're dealing with, people not being able to, get out of their homes, right? We're dealing with the pandemic. We're dealing with folks who couldn't pay their bills because they couldn't get to work. We hadn't figured out the system yet, but we had almost a billion people that, were, had the possibility of not being able to make rent. And so during that period of time, we worked with the federal government and our partners to get rental assistance to people to ensure that we were avoiding evictions. So during that period of time of the great crisis in housing, a lot of the concept that had been around for decades is that Massachusetts laid behind in housing development. We have an unhealthy vacancy rate. We're one of the most expensive states to live in the nation. And so the calculation essentially was that we needed to build about 225,000 units by 2030. That was the goal by the
6 years, 5 years.
By the goal of the Healy administration, by taking sort of the bull by the horns on the housing issue and how it affects, right? It affects our economic vitality, quality of living, affects obviously families. But when you talk to employers in like the Boston Chamber of Commerce or any sort of statewide Chamber of Commerce organization, the three major issues that every employer wants to know in biotech, life sciences, or any of the big sort of education or healthcare sectors and spaces that we're so known for in the country, the three major issues to attract employees is housing, it's childcare, and it's transportation.
Okay.
So those are the most important issues.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So looking at that, the legislature and the governor certainly looked at the future of Massachusetts and the affordability of Massachusetts. And there's a lot of certain different ways that people want to achieve that. I know in the ballot initiative, we have rent control is an issue that some, more progressive folks want to see happen. But what we wanted to do as legislators in the governor's office was to have a stronger and a healthier vacancy rate. How do we do that? Building more.
Yes.
And so the Affordable Homes Act essentially was about building more, trying to reach that goal of a healthy vacancy rate by 2035. Although the goalposts have moved a couple of times just to, and certainly to be able to reach that. But part of the Affordable Homes Act was to put a $5 billion investment in housing production by investing in our housing authorities, 243 across the state, who suffered a lot of years of backlog and maintenance. And this way we could start to build back our housing authorities across the state better and more sustainable in the future. But another piece of it was housing production. And I think that's where it sort of leads to the Affordable Homes Act and looking outside the box and trying to figure out other ways that we can increase housing that didn't specifically have to do with investing with developers on production. What are other tools in the toolbox that we could utilize right now for people to be able to find a place to live and have a good life?
Right. So everyone in Massachusetts now has the right to have an ADU on their property by the state.
So before the Affordable Homes Act, it was a special permit. So, for instance, in Westford, I'll give you an example. I've talked to the land use department on a number of occasions during this whole period of time, and the average time it took for an individual to soup to nuts to build an ADU and to get all the permitting done and to get the special permit passed and the specifications checked off was 2.5 years.
The approval process.
Wow.
The whole process itself is in Westford. On average, is about 2.5 years. Now, that's about standard for the state.
Yes.
Some communities differed, right? So the ability to have a special permit with an accessory dwelling unit, essentially all cities and towns have that ability. So ADUs have existed.
Yep.
There's been more patient individuals went through the process and, in Westford, and they didn't disapprove them necessarily, but the process was a little more rigorous and longer. And I think that was the issue. The issue is people need relief now.
Yep.
How can we, within Westford and our community, offer more housing options? So why are ADUs important? Well, we look at the affordability rate. We look at where Westford and the Massachusetts is, and we talk about 200,000 units by 2035 in order to have a healthy vacancy rate. Well, we have to continue to do that, and we have to continue to look outside the box on other ways that we can, provide tools in the toolbox. So, who benefited from ADUs? Well, individuals want to age in place. There's a lot of empty nesters or people that don't want to leave when their daughter or son has children. They want to be in the mix and around the area, and they want to downsize. So there's a lot of interest in downsizing and being with your family, which is pretty traditional of how a lot of us grew up.
Exactly.
Secondly, would be you think about young people and you're just starting out. If your parents don't want you to officially live in the basement or not, you can have additional options of independence, right? You can have additional options of independence for a period of time to get yourself, get your sea legs and go out and possibly find another place to live at one time. But those are the options for young people, not just with their own home, but young people that need a place to live in just a single apartment that's affordable. That, some of the prices. You folks are in real estate. You know what it's like at Bell Apartments and how much that costs, and the apartments that have crept up. But that is a major issue too. And the last, I would say, is probably the most important to so many families is disabled brothers and sisters who have not a lot of options. Families couldn't afford necessarily to put them in assisted living in some cases. And let's face it, they want to keep people together, right? We want to keep our families together. People want to care for their loved ones within their own roof.
Sure. I think especially after COVID, that was abundantly clear how much
it's definitely changed. And I think that's kind of this conversation about housing in general, right? During COVID, there's a lot of time for for leaders, for individuals, for people to sit back and look at things and think about how we envision the future and what we want to invest in. And that's why the $5 billion was the largest investment in the state's history in housing.
Well, I also think, too, you left off one thing that for me comes to mind as a realtor probably is a source of income for families.
Oh, yeah, of course.
That you could rent that ADU out, or you could live in the ADU and rent your big house out.
That's right.
As well.
There was an issue, too, with occupied, right? So to get to that piece... And I'll get to all the ADU, the ADU pushback when we get to the ADU pushback.
I was going to say, when you were talking about the categories of people who are going to benefit from ADUs.
Sure. I didn't get to the landlord yet.
Yes. Having been in Northern Virginia a lot of time, in D.C. a lot of time, coming up here, the housing stock is so old.
It is.
You can't even fit an elevator or whatever else. So that ability to kind of flatten, for disabled, elderly, to actually have a level unit with all the amenities that you need to live in a 900 square foot or less piece of property, that in itself is amazing, isn't it?
You make a great point. Two provisions of the Affordable Homes Act I'll touch on. We'll get back to ADUs, but two huge provisions. Number one was the fact of historical tax credits. Looking at, you're right. 70% of the housing stock in Massachusetts was built before 1978.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's very accurate, Mary. It's some old infrastructure. Yeah, it's old. And two major provisions of old infrastructure. One was
just like us, old infrastructure.
Historic tax credits to allow stuff like the Abbott Mills to be revitalized and used.
Yeah.
The conversion tax was something. The conversion law, which was something. That I was very interested in. And what is that? And that's to take commercial properties and allow for residential.
Yeah, because
and so
commercial was down and empty buildings, and we needed housing.
Westford is the greatest example of this because I've been, a legislator for almost 2 decades now. And during the subprime mortgage crisis in 2009, 2010, we were cutting ribbons because we were growing high-tech businesses on the 110 corridor from Littleton to Chelmsford. We had Red Hat, NetScout, IBM's largest software lab in North America. 2,700 employees was IBM, which brings me to the conversion piece.
Right. Yes.
Middle of the pandemic, we're going to Rhode Island. We're going to California. We're going to Cambridge, and we're going to North Carolina. Right. So that was Red Hat was leaving. Most of their employees were leaving. They still had a presence. They were purchased by IBM. IBM left. So having a housing crisis in the Affordable Homes Act, the conversion piece was to take commercial to residential and give incentives for developers like Sal Lapoli, who was a local developer, to develop a 500,000 square foot campus into about 1,000 units of housing.
And other things, restaurants. It's going to be mixed use.
It's going to be a mixed use piece.
Amazing.
Great location.
Yeah.
Certainly, which can be argued by Littleton. Some Littleton people don't think it's a great location, but
if you live outside.
Yes, of course. But that was a really big piece when it comes to old infrastructure and looking at the businesses and the business sector, because what changed during the pandemic is we adopted a lot of the remote work. A lot of big companies said, why are we spending this much on overhead? We're going to have people come into Boston or the home office maybe 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and work remote the rest. A lot of that sort of post workforce stuff that came from the pandemic is still in practice, although some employers like State Street, others want people to come in 5 days. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of a hybrid mixture, right? But ultimately, these big companies started saying, well, are we spending this much on overhead to have people come in here? We're going to have them do remote. So now we have space in Tech Park West, Tech Park East, a lot of across from Neshoba Tech. There's a number of discussions about possible housing and other things there. I know Neshoba Tech wants to use it for parking in some instances because of their lack of parking. So there's a lot of sort of looking at old infrastructure, or in that case, business infrastructure, and repurposing it. Repurposing it when it comes to old historic buildings and having credits to do that.
Yep.
And then lastly, I would think would be something, and this is deviating a little bit from ADUs, but it's important on old infrastructure, is the whole idea of the Healthy Homes Act. And what does that mean? Well, if 70% of our housing stock is this old and has been built before 1970, 78, then we're going to have issues with asbestos. We're going to have issues with lead paint. We're going to have issues with black mold. Mm-hmm. And so this is a program that we put in the Affordable Homes Act to be able to identify individuals and look towards incentives for those people who bought these old houses to get, in some cases, a loan program and others, a grant program to help them get their house whole.
The other area, as you talk, is thinking about is the efficiency of utilities. Mm-hmm. Because we're now have no more gas, right? We're putting in electricity, we're putting in splits, and many of these things are really candidates for splits.
Even Mass Save is all about the heat pump and all electric.
The heat pump.
That's the big challenge, I think, in another conversation we could have on the energy bill stuff. People get really nervous about affordability. And so we've had some energy bills that we've worked on, one particular in the House, and people were very critical of the House cutting back on the Mass Save program. Well, the Mass Save program is almost $6 billion, and we support the Mass Save great program, but there has been a lot of people that fall through the cracks to be able to put that money up, to be able to benefit from the Mass Save program, to have the money to do the renovations and the payback. So we're looking at reform on that too, and making sure it works better. But ultimately, to get back to housing for a sec, and especially when the ADU, I think the question early on is, how did this come up?
Yep. Why
is this coming up now? There's special permits. Well, because people weren't still able to access their right to, there wasn't, a buy right, but there was a special permit, and they still couldn't access a special permit in a timely fashion to be able to take care of their loved ones.
Barriers.
Or to allow, exactly. Or to allow people to, age in place and some of these things. So initially the legislation had been kicking around for a couple of years before the Affordable Homes Act. And that was just to essentially get rid of the special permit process.
So you got rid of the permit process, special permit process.
So we didn't get rid of it yet. We had the discussion about getting rid of it. And the bill was filed by the Gov, and it hadn't gotten to the House yet. And myself and Secretary Ed Augustus, the housing secretary at the time, came together, and we had a long conversation at lunch. And this is how the ADU law reform bill came up. And essentially it was, look, I live in the greater Lowell area. I have the planning board in Chelmsford that's very concerned about the ADU law. They're reading the Lowell Sun every day. I'm glad somebody does. And the Lowell Sun really showcased a lot of people from the Belvedere neighborhood in Lowell that were very upset that ADUs were going to change the character of their community, and that ADUs were going to be built everywhere. And so they had huge demonstrations of hundreds of people in Lowell against ADUs. And I think a lot of that frustration also came from the sort of, I think people felt with the shelter being built at UMass Lowell's Inn and Conference Center, there's a lot of questions. People were just unclear, in some ways scared about this new populations coming in, et cetera. And I think that connected to ADUs for some reason. They're a completely different animal, right? But they did connect to that and some of the other towns. But I would say for the most part, the pushback on ADUs were local. I don't know if that's because I'm the rep from Westford, but Lowell and Chelmsford is who I heard from the most.
Yes,
and the residents, not just the town government.
Town government, not as. I mean, town government, and put it this way. The city of Lowell was supporting, because you could support locally your own version of an ADU before by right if all the parameters were in place and the boxes were checked off with HLC, which is Housing Livable Communities. But the by right piece was so important because we wanted to make it uniform and to access access housing right away. Well, that was the goal. And
how's that coming up?
It's going well. If you can tell, I mean, there's been, you guys know in real estate, there's a lot of interest in ADUs and people that want to build ADUs. There's small businesses that have cropped up all over the state to build these things. They typically take about, they've cut the time down. I've heard anywhere from six to 8 months. But I've also heard the price tag is, $90,000 to like $120,000, $130,000. I know a lot of individuals that want to build it, but the barrier, as you say, Mary, some of it was the special permit process. Yeah. And so some cities and towns wanted to hide behind that. We want a special permit process. We don't want people to just go and build these kinds of things and all, et cetera. And the biggest issue that we heard, and maybe it came from Lowell at the time in Belvedere neighborhood, is they were afraid that we're going to build dorms. So it's too expensive to live, in an apartment for individuals, et cetera. Their fear was a developer is going to come and build college dorms essentially out of like a big house in Belvedere. And it's going to be, a party house. It's going to be animal house. It's going to be all these kinds of things. And so how do we sort of make people feel a little bit more comfortable about this major policy piece that we're going to be passing? Well, we did this. Ed Augustus and I got together over coffee, and we had talked about how, some other cities and towns had pushed back and were resistant on it. So this is what we did. We knew that the college dorm issue, or people building multi-units in one location, could make people a little, scared or have some trepidation about, allowing these things to move forward and to not speak up and have their concerns. But we said, okay, the majority of everybody is building one unit. I've never heard of multi-unit ADUs being built in our career, in my time as the housing chair. All right, we'll put the money where your mouth is. So what we said is we're going to have an ADU by right for everybody across the Commonwealth. If you want to build dorms and you want an additional dorms is just a name, something they threw out there. If you want multi-unit, you want an additional unit, you have to go for a special permit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And guess what? No one's doing that.
No one.
Is that where the 900 square feet?
900 square feet was, for the most part, we uniformed the 900 square feet. It had differed. And actually, we could talk about it a little bit later, but there's opportunities within communities to, Westford could vote for a larger 120 unit if it's within these parameters. I think there was some questions, too, about how is this being, is there oversight? How does this work now? Well, Juana Mateus is the new Secretary of Housing. She's a great friend. We sat together in the house for a couple of years, and she's doing a great job. They have created an ADU unit within HLC, and the actual the oversight is actually in HLC is under Secretary Mateus, and it has a whole ADU coordinator and community assistance unit for any technical assistance as well as ADU financing. It's a program through Mass Housing that you can, see if you qualify for, look into it and see what the parameters of it are.
Yeah, so that's for residents that want to do it and don't know how to navigate it. It's a resource.
100%. Or people who want to build them.
Okay.
Right. And how do you,
right.
You've seen all across the state now, Westford in particular just had like a workshop, right? Yep. So land use has been great in Westford and in Chelmsford and Littleton about, people interested and that these are the parameters of the specs that you can do.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard any horror stories just yet about ADUs. They're going to take some time. They still take time to build, right?
Yeah.
And they're still costly. But when you think about those three major categories, of course, income is there as a landlord, additional income. But you look at those three categories and, disabled folks, young folks, and people age in place, you just can't put a price tag on it.
So let me ask you this about septics. So obviously in Boston proper, they're not worried about, there's more sewers than obviously not septics. But out here we have septics. So building an ADU, that's one of the biggest hurdles is to figure out, as well as an added expense. Is there a reason why that wasn't addressed on the state level, or was it just
typically it's part of a unit already, right? It's part of a house already. So you're adding one more bathroom,
right?
You're not adding multi-units, right?
And so it goes by bedroom. So if you have a 4-bedroom septic and you already have a 4-bedroom house, how do you,
Well, that would have to be done through the planning, like the planning offices, land use office, getting direction from HLC of what you can, actually physically accomplish, It has to be, you have to have the space and the infrastructure to do it, right? If the infrastructure is completely lacking, you'd have to look towards other sort of mechanisms to have that happen. I don't know. It'd be a case-to-case basis.
Yeah, I think it does shake out as a case-to-case basis.
Yeah,
also
certainly.
Town to town. So Mary and we've interviewed other people about ADUs, town advocates for Chelmsford.
Yes.
And, the hurdles that the towns, well, I think it's funny. You put in the legislation and now everyone has the right to do it. But then the towns are like, yikes, they seem not ready. The different towns did not seem ready for what this was really going to
Well, they would have to mold it by law in the same specs as the state, number one. But number two, there's also other local ADUs you can have. And I jotted a few things down. So you can have a local ADU that can be worked through your town and through HLC as well. And that may be up to, 1,200 square feet, a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals in your district. So that would be local too. So if the town and town meeting votes, to have, something, I guess you would say a little bit more progressive ADU or liberal ADU, you could have different specifications.
Yeah, I think it's a disconnect between, since it really hadn't been done.
Exactly.
So now they're trying to figure it out. And as it gets done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the difference is, and you're right. I mean, I think the difference is too, is having more of a uniform sort of cookie cutter to work with, and then towns can sort of expand on that if they wanted to do something a little bit, more creative. But for the most part, it was really the issue of a special permit being the barrier.
So
go ahead. Remember the discussion we went to from the town, which are so many septic systems are out of date or not functioning properly. They have to go through a Title V typically. And now they are facing another issue of updating their septic system. So did you run into that as you were?
I've seen that. I mean, yes. So, I mean, either you can build the unit with its own sort of way to do that, or you can try to tie it in. But it depends on if, you only have, so you have a 4-bedroom septic and you had 4 bedrooms, but now you're empty nester. So one's a library, maybe?
Yes, one's a library, right.
So then you can, little wink, wink. But if nobody's living there and it's not a bedroom, then you can sort of transfer that and make that work depending on the town.
Well, I'll give you another completely different angle about all this.
Okay.
Public safety. How does public safety fall into this?
How?
Interesting, right? We talked about the cities and utilities and infrastructure issues and stuff like that. Well, there was a number of legislators. Now, remember this too. The time that this was passed and the time that this was up was during the migrant crisis as well. Mm-hmm. So there was, a lot of xenophobia out there that if we're going to build ADUs, there's going to be, 400 undocumented people living in an ADU.
Look like a favela.
Of course, right? So there's all that stuff that came up. So in caucus, I had to sort of, obviously sell the benefits of this and push back on folks that thought it was going to be something it wasn't. But I met with the Fire Chiefs Association, Massachusetts. They endorsed it. You know why they endorsed it? Because they're building them illegally anyway. And there's no coding. There is no sort of identification with the fire department or the town where these units are.
Right.
So this way, they're still going to have illegal units in different places, but especially in the city, the pushback I got from city legislators was, there's a bunch of, undocumenteds living in all these things, et cetera. And, they're causing this problem to happen. And it's like, okay, guys, like relax, number one. Number two, the Fire Chiefs Association endorsed this bill so they can identify where these issues were, and they could try to prevent a crisis before it happens by not letting it exacerbate because they didn't know where the location was or they didn't know how many people lived there.
Have legal and safe housing. Makes sense.
100%. So that's a big part of the ADU law that people don't think too much about, and it's really about public safety.
So what organizations, I mean, it seems like a bunch of like affordable housing organizations just kind of came behind this.
Yeah.
This sounds like this was a big deal. I mean, in terms of this issue coming forward.
It was an issue that's been brought up, Mary, for decades. Yeah. People talking about why is it so hard to do this? Mm-hmm. Why is it so hard to build this? This is their own property. And, you guys know Chapter 40B. Remember that 25 years ago and how that was going to end, civilization as we know it. And, Westford grew. We've been one of the fastest growing towns over the last 20 years. And in real estate, it's a high demand place to want to live.
Yes, it is.
And people are, attracted to, the history of the town and the great open space and the great school systems that we have. But it's just so hard to live. And so hard to find some place that's affordable. I look at myself, and I bought a house for a song because I just happen to run into something. But I've also have a 130-year-old house, and I'm constantly, my wife and I are constantly doing something. Yeah. But that's the reality for a lot of people that may not be wealthy. How do they make ends meet? How do they live in the community they grew up in? Mm-hmm. How do they want to find sort of a balance of affordability? And so those are the challenges. But the public safety issue is real. It doesn't make sense that a special permit should, I just remember the town telling me 2.5 years. That's insane.
Crazy.
So it has been a popular law. Mm-hmm. And to your question, Mary, like it's been kicking around for a long time, but I think that balance we carved to allow one special permit so people didn't feel as if there was this huge intrusion on single family homes and a huge character change, if you will, in a neighborhood. Is to limit that to one special permit. And if the town chooses they want to, then they can do it. And that's how we look at it. Put it back on the town.
It seems like it was so subjective. The barriers were subjective, right? In Northern Virginia, everything's run by a county, and you go to the county for everything. There are a few little independent towns, but there was a lot of xenophobia in a very international area. You can't pave certain percentage of your lawn because it will have 20 cars and things like that, and you can only have an in-law unit.
Yep.
And so that was a big.
Well, you had
barrier.
to be related.
Yes, it was
previous times.
Prove. Yep. And when they weren't there anymore, you couldn't use it anymore. And how was that enforced?
Yeah.
And so there were a whole lot of barriers. They felt very subjective, and they took forever.
Sure.
So this is amazing progress. Amazing progress.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm very proud about it, and especially since that even the change that we did on allowing one special permit, and each additional will go to town meeting or the select board or something like that, depending upon what your legislative body is within that town. But ultimately, there wasn't much pushback, and the people that still didn't want it no matter what didn't have a lot to say back at that.
Exactly.
But still, it was this whole idea that, okay, well, you're opening up the floodgates to something else. And that's where it came to like the owner occupied stuff. We went back and forth. Before the debate happened, we had a lot of internal conversations about owner occupied. At the time, there was a lot of sort of like, I would say real estate organizations, others that wanted owner occupied because they felt that people would have some sort of trepidation about letting folks they didn't, having a presence of someone who owned it still, that it wouldn't go into disarray, mm-hmm. or people wouldn't be inviting additional, additional sort of individuals into the community that wasn't supposed to be slated for, or they have additional people living in there that are supposed to, all these kinds of things, and owner occupy would prevent that. Well, there's a lot of racial and racist undertones on that as well, and that you're creating additional barriers by making it owner occupied, and we're in a housing crisis, so we want to have all the tools available to people to build more and to live someplace and to address this. And so that was additional barrier that I just don't really. It was really rooted in reality that owner occupied really had too much to do with it.
That's another big win.
Yeah, that was a big win.
It was hard. Mm-hmm. People had a lot of concerns. I mean, even MMA had concerns, Mass Municipal Association.
Yes, I would imagine.
They did. And that's also, those concerns are coming from their town managers and select board people that we're hearing from their residents. And so that's what it is. It isn't necessarily they're against it. They're just sharing the concerns of their membership.
Yeah, they painted these scenes of these developers coming in and changing the whole character of a neighborhood. We're going to have this problem, and then you're going to have Airbnb, and you're going to have all this going on. And yes, the fear, there was a lot of fear.
Even if we didn't change the one special permit, and by right and then a special permit, even if we didn't change that, I used to always say this to people, and I'd say it behind closed doors that were, other legislators would be like, come on, it takes 2 years to do this. Right. How can we, what, we're going to have a college dorm in Lowell in year 2058? Like, that'll be the time they finish building all these. Are you kidding me?
Well, yes.
What are we talking about?
So
it's just another excuse to say this could happen, so therefore don't do anything.
There's one other group that is really happy about this legislation. Massachusetts was the 19th state to pass this legislation, which was really amazing, just to have that progress. Since then, New Hampshire has, of course, passed the legislation. Investors are so happy. There's a whole West Coast movement where they used to say, buy 10 properties, have 10 renters, you'll be set for life in terms of your income. Now the message is buy 5 properties, make sure that you develop it with 5 more ADUs, and you are then, this is the new way to be very wealthy. So your investors, Mary, this is what they need to do.
Yeah.
Well, it helps all boats. It's lifting all boats, right?
And it's lifting all boats.
It's people can make a living. If it's something internal with their family, they can keep their family together. It's a disabled family member, they can stay with them and not go bankrupt for some facility that they have. And my wife does home health care, and the more people you can have at home with their family and have the treatments at home, the better. These are all the things that are important to us, and I think they're the things that generally, when you think about aging in place, right? Yep. Young people, where they're going to go, and disabled, and how we protect our disabled brothers and sisters and family members. Well, I think a lot of that comes out of the pandemic. It's what do we think is important now? Like, how many of us sat back and thought to ourselves, is this meeting that important, really? Well, look at the grand scheme of things. What's most important? Our families are most important. Our families' well-being, where they can live. How do we protect them? Where they will go. And I think that's the most important.
Well, this is awesome conversation. I know we have lots of opportunity to talk
so we can talk a lot more.
Because, a whole lot more about other housing issues. And we would love to call on your experience there too. Yeah. And thank you so very much, Representative.
This was great.
And you don't know this, but maybe a year and a half ago, this wave of excitement went through the real estate community. It was like, ADUs, what is this going to mean? This is not going to be a good thing. And then ultimately...
Was the wave of excitement about ADUs or that we didn't do the real estate transfer tax?
Oh, I don't know about that.
I thought it was a real estate transfer tax. I thought that was the wave of excitement for the real estate community.
That's all about the wave of excitement.
You're right. Explain to
you.
We can be excited about more than one thing, Jen.
Absolutely.
But yes.
Well, thank you for doing this show. This is exciting. I was driving by the senior center the other day, and I saw the placard outside that said ADU discussion. I was like, how cool is that, right?
Perfect.
We did this law, and I'm very proud of it.
Good.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you found this conversation useful to you and your real estate goals. You'll find the contact information for our guests and any links they recommend you have in the show notes. And should we be able to help you identify some strong real estate professionals in your area, drop us a note at info@realestateconnectionspodcast.com. Thanks again, and bye for now.